Hello, and welcome to another of the Good Projects professional development sessions. Today's session is about the topic of ethics. We're going to look at what ethics means and talk about a few different frameworks that can help us analyze how ethical thinking occurs. As you know, our Good Work framework has three components. Those are excellence, ethics, and engagement. And today we're looking at the second of those components. We're going to be thinking deeply about what ethics means and looks like. So ethics can be a big word. When you hear the word ethics, you might wonder, what does this mean? And what does it mean related to good work? You might have some of these connotations in mind, wondering, is ethics about right and wrong? Is it about personal decisions? Is it about how I affect others? And really, it can be any of the above and more. Ethics is complicated, but at its most basic, it concerns views of what is right and wrong, and also might be affected by our personal values, opinions, and frames of thinking, and how we make decisions with those values, opinions, and frames of thinking in mind. It also might be about how we consider the effects of our actions on others, and what is right or wrong in that type of framing. A caveat as we begin, though, is that the Good Project doesn't have all the answers about how ethical decision-making occurs or what the one ethical thing to do might be in any situation. Our project deliberately doesn't take one particular ethical stance in talking about or considering ethical dilemmas or ethical situations. While there might be wrong answers that we would discourage people or students in thinking about when they consider a dilemma or ethical situation, there's probably no single right answer in those types of situations or scenarios either. There might be multiple right paths, and that's what really makes something a dilemma or an ethical conundrum. What we're trying to encourage is new ways of thinking, and also the ability to think in ways that promote ethical reflection. So to that end, we're going to talk about a few different frames of considering ethics that might be helpful to assist us in analyzing our thinking. So first, we wanted to talk about a trolley problem. And many of you might be familiar with trolley problems. They're often used as thought experiments in ethical philosophy. And this one comes from a website called Absurd Trolley Problems that we thought might be engaging to discuss. So this absurd trolley problem says, oh no, a trolley is heading towards a rich man. The rich man offers you $500,000 to pull the lever, which would divert the trolley and kill someone else. What would you do? Pull the lever or do nothing? You can think about what you would like to do for a moment. But what we might do or decide upon depends upon the frame of mind we have, and also the ethical framework with which we're approaching the situation. So we want to talk about three ethical frameworks in particular that might influence how someone would make a decision in this scenario. So first, we could approach this scenario based on utilitarianism or an ends-based type of thinking. So that would be doing the greatest good for the greatest amount or number of people, and also thinking about the end result, how can we help the most people in this scenario while doing a cost-benefit analysis? So back to that trolley problem. A utilitarian perspective or utilitarian person might say, we should pull the lever and the trolley should hit this other person who is not the rich man. That is because it would maximize the happiness of two people. If you don't pull the lever and the trolley runs over the rich man, you've essentially maybe lost out on this $500,000 gift that the rich man is giving to you. So it would maximize the happiness of you and one other person, the rich man, to take the bribe and to pull the lever so that the trolley is diverted to hit the other person. However, that's not the only way to approach this decision. There's maybe a deontological perspective or a rule-based perspective that you could approach this situation with. In deontology, which is based on principles of right and wrong, it's that you would do what you would like others to do. So if everyone acted in this particular way, would it produce good? The means do not justify the ends, and we should be observing what our duty is or what the rule is that we should be following regardless of the outcome. So how would someone who has a deontological perspective respond to this trolley problem? They might say, we should do nothing. We should not pull the lever. It's wrong to take part in any action that's going to result in the injury or death of someone else. And if we pull the lever, we would be actively diverting the trolley from its consistent ongoing path to hit someone else. So we would be taking part in that action. An alternative perspective, maybe a deontologist would say, it's simply wrong to accept a bribe in order to do something. So we can't accept the $500,000 from the rich man. We're not going to pull the lever for that reason. And then finally, a third ethical framework that we could use to approach this scenario. And this one aligns probably most closely with what we're trying to encourage on the Good Project and how we would like students to come away thinking about ethics, might be related to a virtue-based or character strength-based way of approaching the situation. So we could think about what is right, being the actions that someone with strong character traits would do. And those would be examples of character traits like bravery, curiosity, open-mindedness, and intellectual humility. You see I have curiosity accidentally printed twice here. We really like curiosity on the project. And that would be being virtuous and seeking truth through our actions. So what would a virtue-based approach be to addressing this situation? Maybe a virtue ethicist would say, we should actually not really be even thinking about either of these options, and this might be cheating a little bit, but what a virtuous path would be to try to help one or both of these people by untying them from the track. We should show selflessness and bravery in the situation. Maybe we ourselves should jump in front of the trolley. There might be something on the side that we could use to throw in front of the trolley to stop it. So those are three ways of approaching the situation through kind of Western ethical philosophy paradigms. There are other philosophical and spiritual traditions that exist that might influence our moral and ethical thinking as well. And these might come from some of your own cultures or backgrounds. I just wanted to provide a few examples here. So Ubuntu in Southern Africa, this idea of a relational aspect, how we see ourselves with the group. Confucianism from Chinese philosophy being a lot about family relationships and also the idea of social harmony. And then religious faiths or other religious faiths might have some influence on how we would approach an ethical situation like this and make a decision based on principles that we might learn from those religious traditions. And again, these are just examples. There are others that you can probably think of that you would like to see added here, and we'd love to hear about those. So in addition to these ethical paradigms, a second thing that we wanted to talk about are these moral foundations, they're called. So these moral foundations come from the research of a man named Jonathan Haidt. And basically, these are based on the idea that there are common moral tensions that underlie a lot of ethical conflicts and ethical decisions that we make, and that might influence our feelings in the day-to-day about ethical dilemmas and ethical decisions. And so you can see these 6 particular tensions that are on the left-hand side of the slide. So I'm just going to read them out. These moral foundations were found in research to be common between societies, but the degree to which different societies or people value these might result in ethical disagreements and be at the root of ethical decision-making and tensions around that. So 1, care and harm, that's the idea of virtues of kindness or gentleness, how much we care for other people. 2, fairness and cheating. These center on ideas of justice, rights, and autonomy, including equality concerns. 3, loyalty and betrayal. So this concerns how loyal we might feel to a group, virtues of patriotism at the national or even smaller group level, and self-sacrifice for the group. 4, ideas of authority and subversion, how much we respect leadership and when we're willing to subvert leadership. 5, sanctity and degradation. So notions of an elevated, less carnal, or more noble way. These are often common to religious traditions. And then 6, liberty and oppression. So feelings towards those who dominate, the degree to which we can hold liberty and the degree to which we are oppressed, and how much we're willing to tolerate those. So these 6 moral foundations may be valued very differently in some groups versus others. For example, a lot of research has been done on the degree to which Democrats and Republicans in the United States might disagree on the degree to which they value each one of these types of paradigms. And you might also find yourself thinking about To what degree do I find each one of these to be important in my life, and how much do I weigh each one of these in making an ethical decision? And your students may as well. You might want to think about some of these questions as well, the degree to which you would agree or disagree with each one of these statements as a way to consider what moral foundations might I be valuing. So this is a random smattering of items that was taken from the group that has researched moral foundations, one of their surveys. And you can see here, you might want to consider yourself or with colleagues, to what degree do I agree or disagree with each one of these? And if you're with colleagues, maybe this is at the root of sometimes why I feel tensions around particular issues with other people, with them, or with my family, with my group, or even with my country. So you can read each one of these if you want to take a moment to pause. Again, these have been taken from a survey about the ethical and moral foundations here, and you can consider the degree to which you agree or disagree with each of them. And then finally, a third way of approaching ethics, which we often have used on the Good Project in the past, is in relation to responsibility. So we often talk about ethics regarding a set of responsibilities to the world around you that can be conceptualized as this set of concentric rings. So you might feel a responsibility to yourself, to others who are close to you, to community members who maybe are even further out from you, to your profession, organization, and also to the wider world or society, maybe even to the globe. And it's oftentimes in figuring out where these responsibilities lie and in trying to reconcile these responsibilities that ethical dilemmas can occur, and then ethical situations can be hopefully resolved. So again, ethical dilemmas might arise when there are conflicts between these layers. You could imagine situations where perhaps you might feel a disagreement between what you want for yourself and what you know to be better for the wider world, and that might cause an ethical conundrum. And oftentimes on the Good Project, we look for examples of these types of ethical conundrums in the news. And sometimes these breaches of responsibility or conflicts between responsibilities seem to cause big ethical failures or scandals. And these are just two examples. So some of you might know the Theranos example, which was a company that was developing what they purported to be a blood test that would be able to diagnose many different conditions and diseases from just a single drop of blood. The science ended up not being able to actually do that. It proved to be impossible. And what we would think about there with the responsibilities that the Theranos leadership might have had in mind, it seemed like there was really this potential effort to give them the benefit of the doubt. They could have been thinking about, it would be great if we as a company would be able to make this scientific breakthrough. Maybe they were actually feeling a responsibility to society to try to actually do what they were purporting to do. But once the science ended up not being there, not being able to make that breakthrough, it seemed like their responsibility really shifted to be about themselves and the company and how to keep it going and avoid having to close down the company and give back the funding that they had received. So you can see their attention maybe between these conflicting layers of responsibility and that resulting in an ethical scandal. Similarly with Facebook, we've seen that the company has somewhat abdicated in certain circumstances a responsibility to society and that wider outer ring, thinking about the effect that social media has had on things like national elections in the United States and other countries around the world, and Facebook leadership really being concerned again with maybe those more inner rings of responsibility, and that causing an ethical issue of, okay, well, this technology is really being used in order to wield influence over national elections, over decisions that people are making. What should Facebook's responsibility be in that? And maybe the leadership feeling some sense of conflict or not really considering even that outer ring enough in order to address it. So that's just to consider that really thinking through those different layers of responsibility, those concentric rings, might help us when we're actually facing ethical scenarios, thinking about, well, not only what's right for me and for my company or organization or for those close to me, but what's right for society. Taking that kind of lens can really help us in making ethical decisions. So given these frames that we've presented, and this is a lot of information to take in, we're going to have you do an exercise. So you can choose a dilemma that's available at the handout at this link at the bottom of the slide, or you can scan this QR code as well in order to access the handout and look at the two dilemmas that are going to be available to you. And I want you to think through, if you were using this dilemma in your classroom, number one, what ethical frameworks, moral foundations, or responsibilities would you want to be sure to bring up with your students? And then number two, how could you make these ideas that we've talked about so far clear and applicable to your students? And I'll show you on the next two slides what these two dilemmas are. So the first dilemma is about a student who is graduating from high school or secondary school. She's a scientist and she's dedicated to her work, but she encounters a situation where she knows that her friends get into trouble for hacking a computer system. She herself doesn't tell on them though, because she didn't want to rat on them. And she's feeling a conflict about that, maybe difference of principles between how she treats her friends and the standards she has for herself as a scientist. In this second situation, it's about a nurse named Madeline, and she's working with a coworker, Paul, and she notices that he likes a meme on social media that expresses anti-immigrant sentiment, which makes her uneasy because the hospital where they both work deals with a lot of immigrant patients and immigrant communities. And so she's grappling with how does she handle what she's seen, and especially considering that Paul is more senior to her on her team. So you can take a moment to think about both of those scenarios using the handout that you should have access to from that QR code. You can pause here and just take a moment or several minutes to think through what would you raise from either or both of these scenarios from the ethical frameworks that we've heard about their responsibilities, about maybe how they should approach this situation from a utilitarian, deontological, or virtues-based perspective, and what moral foundations might be at stake here. And you can talk about those questions with your colleagues as well if you're doing this in a group. So take a moment maybe to pause the video and to complete that activity on the handout. Once you're ready to move on, another thing that we'd like you to be able to do is to really think through, when students are responding to dilemmas, how can I figure out what's going on in their mind, and what of the frameworks that we've covered might be coming up for them, and might I be able to see in their responses? So thinking in that way, this is another dilemma, a third dilemma that we're going to think through together. So this is about a student named Maria, who she lives in a small town. Her mother and father are workers for a large oil company, and the oil company has been polluting a river on the edge of town, which is also a sacred site for a local indigenous group, which is calling for the oil company to stop drilling and for a peaceful protest on the oil company's land. So some of Maria's friends are going to the protest and ask her to join them. She wants to go because she cares about the environment, but she worries it could affect her parents' pay as workers for the oil company if the company has to shut down because of the protests for a few days. And they're in a precarious situation because Maria has 4 younger siblings and her parents are already struggling to take care of the family with their lower income levels. So you might want to pause and read this scenario yourself. Take a moment to pause the video here. And then at the following link, you can use the link again or the QR code, you will find 5 real student responses to this dilemma. So this dilemma is one that the Good Project presented to a sample of students in previous research. And we got a lot of different responses from those students who were in high school about how they thought that Maria should respond. And what you want to be thinking about as you look through these different responses, how do the responses connect, again, to the ethical frameworks, the moral foundations, and the rings of responsibility that we discussed today as ways of approaching ethical dilemmas and as ways of analyzing ethical thinking? So take some time to do that. Again, you may want to pause the video here and complete that exercise. So some final thoughts about ethical thinking are that conversations about ethics might require structure and guardrails, You can use the frameworks, the moral foundations, and the rings of responsibility that we've talked about here today in order to help guide student thinking. These can be great frameworks and models to bring into the classroom when you're having discussions about ethical dilemmas or when ethical issues arise, in order to try to think through and analyze, well, what's really the tension here that we're facing? Why is this an ethical dilemma? What values might be at stake? And what responsibilities might someone be facing? How can we think through this together? And then second, we wanted to emphasize that it's important for student engagement to try to find ways to connect with what your students care about and what's happening in your school or location when you're having these kinds of conversations. So this is a great opportunity when you're bringing ethical dilemmas into the classroom to really get students thinking about issues that might matter to them. You could bring up, for example, topics like climate change or recent conflicts that have been happening in the news. You could bring up anything that might be happening at your school in order to try to get students really talking and active and thinking through, okay, what is at stake here? Why is this an ethical issue? And then as you're having those discussions, look for the underlying frameworks or assumptions that students are using in their arguments and bring those to the surface. And again, the ethical frames, the moral foundations, and the rings of responsibility model are really helpful in doing that. You might be able to better parse through what your students are talking about and what types of tensions are really underlying those comments. This is a final wrap-up thinking routine that you might like to use from Project Zero. So based on what you've heard, and there's a lot of content about ethics in this session, maybe write a headline that captures the most important aspect of this topic or issue for you. And how does your headline differ from what you would have said yesterday about ethics or about what you write your headline concerning? And with that, thank you for joining us for this session about ethics. We hope it's given you a little more insight into how we think about the term ethics on the project and to different ways that you might be able to approach this topic with your students. Thank you again.